To this discussion now, a new Oxfam report published on World Food Day, and that's today, it shows that 7,023 people are likely dying each day from hunger. This is in war zones. In South Africa, though, an estimated 16.7 million tons of food is wasted, with experts saying 40 million people could be fed from that quantity. Let's speak now to AgriSA Chief Economist Wandile Sihlobo, who joins us tonight for this important conversation. Mr. Sihlobo, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. We are reminded today that food is a basic human need, but parts of the world, particularly in the global south, are food insecure, and there is also the worsening element of malnutrition. Talk to us first as to whether or not, as a country, South Africa, we are food insecure.
Well, I think within the South African context, at a national level, we are food secure. In fact, if you look at the agricultural production and you consider also the products that we process, we export about half of what we produce each year. And last year, that was about just over $13 billion of agricultural products.
Yeah.
Importantly, also, when you look at the food prices globally, and you look at where South Africa sits, we sit on the side that is more affordable. So indeed, I can confirm that at a national level, we have sufficient supplies as South Africa.
Let's put aside for a moment the extreme weather events and conflict, because those are factors that do contribute to parts of the world being food insecure. In South Africa, though, Mr. Sihlobo, if we are indeed food secure as a nation, you would have seen reports in the recent past coming out of the Eastern Cape suggesting that mothers are resorting to not only killing their babies and themselves in the process because of hunger, and this is something that got us talking as a nation for the first time, I think, when we came across these reports. Who or what is to blame for such an occurrence where a parent would resort to taking their own lives, including those of their children, because of hunger? Who's not doing their job?
The situation of South Africa, which I think it needs a bit of context, is that, yes, indeed, at a national level, we have sufficient food supplies. But when you begin then to look at a household level, we have our food insecurity as a country. The root cause of the problem, in our assessment, is that we have what we would term as income poverty, which means that there are millions of households in South Africa with no income. So regardless of how much food products could cost, if there is no income, that particular household will remain in an extreme condition. And I think the case of the Eastern Cape that you are referring to is perhaps the acute example of the painful situation that so many in South Africa find themselves in. The key question then that arises is to say, what should we be doing as a country to tackle some of those problems?
Yeah.
I think the approach there would have to be multi-layered. There is one aspect of it which deals with creating as many employment opportunities as we can find in a range of sectors of our economy. The other aspect of it is also to say, what can we do to assist the households to be involved in some form of agricultural activity, to benefit in a range of support systems that the government do put in place, and some of the NGOs. And I think that on who's responsible for resolving this, a great deal of the responsibilities lie in the government, but I think that as society and the businesses and the others involved, we have to try to say, how do we cushion those communities that we operate in?
Yeah.
But for the long-term solution of this, will lie on creating work opportunities for many South Africans that are fit and able to work.
I guess you've answered in part the question around the cost of living crisis, which has become a global topic of discussion as we see food prices really becoming astronomical. Let's talk then about weather events. How vulnerable are we to climate change, and is the situation, or could the situation get so out of hand to a point where we could possibly become food insecure as a nation?
I think we are all vulnerable to the shocks of climate change. But what has cushioned South Africa at a national level, one, is the fact that we have invested as a country a lot in technology, improved seed varieties, seed cultivars, genetics in animals, which in a way we are able to deliver and have an output that cushions us even in extreme conditions. And in fact, the year that we are in is an example of that, where if you look across the African continent, countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, they've lost more than half of their staple grain maize. In South Africa, we saw much lower losses than what the others in the continent have seen, to an extent that even in extreme conditions like this, we're still food secure and able to assist them. But then the South African story always has to be looked at in two layers, because even if I say technology has assisted in agriculture, but only you have to remember that we are a country of two agricultures. Those that are at the commercial and the large scales part, they are able to tap into these technologies and some of the resources that are there. But the minute you look at a small scale, remote rural communities, you do find that there are farmers that do face quite a devastating situation whenever there are these shocks. And perhaps you may recall a few years back in 2015-16, where we had that difficult drought where cattle and livestock in KZN and many provinces was dying because of that. So yes, we are vulnerable to climate shocks, but I think the adoption of technology in part will be one of the solutions to adapting to some of these unpredictable weather events. But we have to ensure that that technology reaches as many hands of the farmers as possible.
Final topic of discussion, Mr. Sihlobo, is that of conflict. We are not a country that is at war. However, parts of the continent, like Sudan, for example, there is serious food insecurity there, to a point where people are literally dying of hunger because they are in a war zone. How do you think food could still be supplied in areas like that? What could be the solution there?
I think, Dolly, the problem of Africa's food insecurity is a long-standing one. Conflict is one of the reasons for that. The second aspect of it is the fact that politicians in Africa have been resistant to embracing the technological advantages that are out there, which South Africa has embraced. These better seeds, these better genetics, but also the fact that in Africa, you have a situation where 90% of the rural land outside of South Africa has no formal title. Infrastructure is also not there. All of these are factors that limit the investments that is needed to ensure that the agriculture and the food system across the continents take off, as what we see here in the continent, in South Africa at home, as well as what we see in the northern parts of the continent in Egypt and the others. So we will have to resolve those long-term structural things so that we begin to see Africa's agricultural productivity improving. The conflicts, they do need to be resolved. But I think that once you pass that, there are structural things that are related to land governance, to infrastructure, to embracing of technology that I think are important. And there's no better example from the African continent than looking down here in South Africa and seeing how can they take some of the lessons and impact there. And certainly us as South Africa to take our own lessons to say, in the thriving commercial space, what can we do in the former Transkei, in the former homelands of KZN and Limpopo to learn from other areas that are thriving in South Africa to ensure that collectively we see that agriculture improving. And the reason, which is my last point, I'm emphasizing this, Claudie, I made the point earlier that our household food insecurity is income poverty. And in South Africa, we think the agricultural sector still has a capacity with its value chain to create about 1 million jobs. And this sector could see its gross value added expanding by 30%. And we all know what needs to be done. It's in the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan and Chapter 6 of NDP. And if we do that, to an extent, we will begin to tackle the income poverty that faces so many South Africans.
Wandile Sihlobo is an agriculture economist, a chief economist at AgriSA. Thank you very much for your time and insights.